and welcome. You are watching Gravitas with me, Molly Gambhir. Tonight, we start off the show with a question that has haunted the world for months, and given the latest developments, it is a question that is the most pressing one tonight. Could Ukraine go nuclear? On Gravitas tonight, we piece together the latest developments and tell you why the way things are changing on the ground in Ukraine is a cause of concern. Which way are things headed? Is the world bracing for a nuclear disaster? Also on the show for you tonight, it is a request that the Ukrainian president has made repeatedly, but does Ukraine really need F-16 jets? On the sidelines of the G7 summit, Joe Biden tells the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi that he should take his autograph given how popular the leader is. We also ask just how popular are the G7 leaders back home? Did Jeffrey Epstein try to blackmail Bill Gates? What's the story there and why is it surfacing now? And in our Monday Motivation segment, we get to the story of a double amputee, Gurkha veteran, who reached the summit of Mount Everest. Could the Ukraine war go nuclear? Over the weekend, we heard the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, compare Bakhmut to Hiroshima. He said, and I'm quoting, "Photographs of ruined Hiroshima absolutely remind me of Bakhmut and other similar settlements. Nothing left alive, all the buildings ruined." Now, to say that the comparison is far-fetched would be an understatement. And you don't need us to tell you that. But what we can tell you tonight is that the real Hiroshima is waiting to happen somewhere else. Some 270 odd kilometers from Bakhmut, in Zaporizhia. It is a town in Ukraine, and I'm sure most of you have heard about it. Zaporizhia is home to a nuclear plant, and this plant is on the line of fire. One misfire could result in a catastrophic nuclear disaster. Something that could be worse than Hiroshima. First, let me tell you a little bit about the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, or what's called the ZNPP. It is one of the world's biggest nuclear plants, also Europe's largest nuclear power plant. Now, before the war, Zaporizhia used to supply around 20% of Ukraine's electricity. The plant has 6 Soviet-era reactors, and together they generate about 6,000 megawatts of energy, which is enough to light up 4 million homes. Russia seized control of this nuclear plant in March 2022, and today the plant is run by Ukrainian technicians working under nuclear experts from Russia's State Atomic Energy Corporation and the Russian Armed Forces. In the last 1 year, there have been multiple instances of shelling close to the facility. In fact, power production was halted in September, but the facility remains connected to Ukraine's power grid. Why, you ask? To cool the reactors. You see, the Zaporizhia power plant still contains tens of thousands of kilograms of radioactive materials. In case the cooling process stops, the nuclear fuel will start melting, which will then create high pressure, resulting in an explosion. And what happens following an explosion? A nuclear leak. The explosion will give rise to invisible radioactive clouds. And they could travel anywhere depending on the weather. Those on the path will suffer from radiation poisoning. Even those exposed to lower levels of radiation will be at the risk of developing cancer later on in their lives. While there will surely be hundreds and thousands fleeing from the town and from towns near Zaporizhia, there is no guarantee where the effect of this leak could stop. Zaporizhia, you see, is in the middle of Europe. So no matter which way the wind blows, people in Europe are bound to be affected by it. And the symptoms, by the way, may vary from nausea to vomiting, cramps, diarrhea. In some cases, the symptoms may occur within hours of exposure. They may go away within a week or two if the levels of exposure are less, but those with high degrees of radiation have slim chances of survival. They will experience loss of consciousness, burning sensation of skin, severe nausea, which eventually leads to death within 3 days of exposure. Sounds scary, does it not? Well, here's what's scarier. The Zaporizhia nuclear plant had a power outage in the last 24 hours. Ukraine said the outage was the result of Russian shelling, and Russia denies this. The UN nuclear watchdog has been trying to get Russia and Ukraine to agree to form a protection zone around the nuclear plant, but so far there has been no luck. The watchdog has managed to station a small team of nuclear safety experts outside the power plant. But the sense on the ground is that the situation is getting desperate. Currently, the plant relies on only one external power line. Before the war, it had 4. Any slip could change the course of the war. Also, the future of those who are living in Ukraine and outside. The UN's nuclear chief, Rafael Grossi, says, I'm quoting, nuclear safety situation at the plant is extremely vulnerable. In other words, it is a nuclear disaster waiting to happen. Hiroshima was the tip of the iceberg in terms of what a nuclear war could result in. Zaporizhia is a test of whether 7 decades on, the world has really learned a lesson. Hiroshima is where the world's first atom bomb was dropped. Within seconds, the town was erased from the face of the planet. Most of the buildings were gone. So were 140,000 people. And those who survived were left to find cancer and chronic diseases. What happened in Hiroshima destroyed a generation and many that followed. Could Europe go down the same road? And since we began by telling you about Volodymyr Zelensky's comparison of Hiroshima and Bakhmut, why don't we also tell you about what is happening in Bakhmut on the ground? As usual, there are conflicting claims. And over the weekend, Russia claimed control of entire Bakhmut. The announcement was made by the Wagner chief. Listen in.
There are no Ukrainian soldiers in Bakhmut because we have stopped taking prisoners. There are a huge number of corpses of Ukrainian soldiers. Bakhmut has been captured completely in all its legal borders down to the last centimeter.
There were visuals of Russians celebrating the fall of what has been called the fortress town. And Ukraine, on the other hand, says its troops are advancing, but Kiev has admitted that the intensity of its movement has reduced. Russia's Wagner Group says its troops will leave Bakhmut by the 1st of June as it transfers the control of the eastern Ukrainian city to Russia. So this is what the situation on ground is, and as it has been for the last few months, there is no clarity. And this is exactly what experts are pointing out, while also making the point that as things stand, Russia seems to be the one in a better position.
In terms of Bakhmut, nothing is left. So, control is not military, it's political. So Russia don't control the area. They have it in terms of they seize it. They are forces on the ground. In terms of then turning that into some form of political political control, reinvesting in infrastructure, actually making Bakhmut a bit of a hub. It's going to be very, very difficult. And the issue now is that the Russians will just find themselves in an area that they might not even be able to stay in long term because the infrastructure does not exist. So then the ability to then keep the city in their hands and then continue further west is going to be very, very difficult.
Now, not too long ago, Volodymyr Zelensky had told a US media outlet that soon after Bakhmut, Russia could, quote-unquote, go to Kramatorsk. They could go to Sloviansk. It would be open road for the Russians after Bakhmut to other towns in Ukraine in the Donetsk region, in the Donetsk direction. Other towns in Ukraine in the Donetsk direction. Now that Bakhmut has fallen, it may not be long before the Russian troops and the Wagner men march to Sloviansk, followed by Kramatorsk. Remember, already it has Soledar, Mariupol and Melitopol. And this is exactly why the battle for Bakhmut was so critical. And like the expert pointed out, there is not much left to the city. Winning the city is about sending out a political message and scoring strategic points and strategic goals. And Russia appears to have successfully done both. And staying on with Ukraine, the prospect of the war going nuclear was not the only thing that came up during the G7 summit. What was also discussed was the need to provide Ukraine with more weaponry like the F-16 fighter jets, which Kiev has been seeking for quite some time now. And guess what? America has finally accepted this demand. After months of insistence that Ukraine did not need the jets, the American government has finally relented, saying that it will allow its Western allies to supply Ukraine with F-16 jets. And that's not all. American troops will also train Kiev's pilots to use the jets. And both these decisions were taken by Biden in Hiroshima in the presence of his G7 counterparts. So by when will Ukraine have these jets is the immediate question. Reports say as early as this fall, between August and September. And just how many jets will Ukraine receive? Reports say up to 200. At least that is how many Kiev has sought. Now, before we delve further, let's also get to know the jets a little bit. The F-16 is a single-engine, multi-role jet aircraft, meaning that it can be used in air-to-air or ground attack missions. The US Air Force calling the F-16, which first flew in the 1970s, a relatively low-cost, high-performance weapon system. And according to the Flight Global's World Air Forces Directory, almost 2,200 F-16s are active worldwide this year. And this makes them the single most popular combat aircraft across the planet, with 15% of the world's fleet. So how has Ukraine reacted to the news? With excitement, of course. Have a look at the tweet on your screen. It's from the Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky. He says, and I'm quoting, "I welcome the historic decision of the United States to support an international fighter jet coalition. This will greatly enhance our army in the sky." So Ukraine is elated as a result of that decision, of course. But what about Russia? How is Moscow reacting? With disdain. Have a look at the report on your screen. Russia's deputy foreign minister has warned that providing Ukraine with F-16 fighter jets would be a colossal risk for the Western countries. Let me quote his exact statement. It reads, "We see that Western countries are still adhering to the escalation scenario. It involves colossal risks for themselves. In any case, this will be taken into account in all our plans, and we have all the necessary means to achieve the goals we have set." So basically what Russia is trying to say is that the delivery of the F-16 to Ukraine will not really change the course of this war. Forget about countering Russia's military objectives. But is there any merit to these claims is the question. Let's just try and find out. And to start with, The sheer number of F-16 jets around the world means that they have a proven record of effectiveness. This also means that they have an established logistical trail and a good number of spare parts available the world over. But that said, Ukraine may still face hurdles due to some drawbacks. The first challenge is maintenance. Experts say for a modern fighter jet like the F-16, training maintenance personnel can take longer than training pilots. How much longer? Months or even years, depending on the level of proficiency of the personnel. The second challenge will be pilot training, of course. Reports say to fly the F-16, the pilots need 3 months of training for the basics. Basics like getting the plane up in the air, keeping it in the air, and then landing it safely. And this is followed by combat training, which is even more complex. Experts say learning to employ these jets in a dynamic threat environment could take years. So Ukraine's fighter pilots will have to learn on the job. They will have to train themselves while also fighting the Russians at the same time. And challenge number 3, hiding the jets. Where will Ukraine base the F-16s? Reports say these jets perform the best on long, pristine runways, so they could face hurdles on the rougher, former Soviet ones dispersed across Ukraine. And to deal with this, Ukraine might have to extend a number of runways, repave them, a process which the experts say Russians are likely to detect. Now, these were the challenges. What I am about to show you next complicates matters even further. Have a look at this report. Joe Biden says that Zelensky has promised that he will not use the F-16s against Russia, that the jets will not enter Russian territory, or for that matter, be used in any Ukrainian offensive in the coming weeks. Then why does Ukraine even need them? What is even the point of acquiring these jets? Well, for defense preparedness. Ukraine plans to deploy them only if Russian aggression goes beyond their current capabilities. So at the end of the day, the delivery of these aircraft to Ukraine practically changes nothing. It does not really give Ukraine a military edge over Russia because the Ukrainians neither know how to fly these jets, nor do they plan to deploy them in the immediate term. And this is at best yet another symbolic move meant to allay fears that the West is abandoning Ukraine. Europe seems to be witnessing summer blues. The climate crisis, there are activists protesting against the inaction when it comes to climate change. They've also raised an alarm in some parts of the continent. Along with droughts, floods, wildfires, climate change activists in Rome have been making headlines. Demonstrators poured charcoal into the Trevi fountain. This turned the fountain's bright blue waters into black. Our next report telling you more.
Activists pouring charcoal into the fountain, screaming their lungs out while holding banners. Security forces dragging demonstrators while pulling down their banners. Our country is dying, this is what one of the banners said. Another one urged the government not to pay for fossil campaigns, especially considering the deadly flooding in northern Italy.
We should be worried because maybe it's not affect on us right now at the moment, but little by little it will affect on us more and more, and we will see the change. I believe that our children will have an even bad condition, more bad.
Are such protests by climate activists justified? The mayor of Rome, Roberto Gualtieri, says that the protest at the Trevi fountain is an absurd attack on Rome's artistic heritage. He has urged activists to hold talks and avoid putting monuments at risk. These stunts by climate activists might grab the public's attention, but they also prove costly to the government. Officials say that the 300,000-litre fountain will have to be emptied, and the dyed water will be disposed safely. This will cost time, effort, and of course water. Throwing away 300,000 litres of water seems a little counterproductive, especially for activists who want to save our planet. Although their way of protesting might not make sense to some, their climate mission in its entirety does make sense. Protesters have criticized the government for not preparing for climate change. Floods have ravaged northern Italy. Piles of destroyed furniture, survivors walking through flooded streets, and continuously rising water. This is what the region of Emilia-Romagna is witnessing, where over 14 people have been killed, and over 36,000 people have been displaced.
The situation has not improved. The water level of the main river has risen by 30 centimeters from yesterday to today, so we are worried that it may burst its banks.
Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni visited the flood-ravaged region.
I have seen so much pride in the affected citizens, people motivated by the desire to rebuild, to participate. I found it incredible. Usually, when you have these catastrophes and tragedies, there is a risk that resignation takes over everything. That is not what we found, really.
Meloni said that the government will find the resources needed. The government will also hold talks on how to respond to the emergency. Shouldn't these talks have taken place earlier? How long do people have to wait before getting aid? This might just be the start of Europe's summer blues. Why do we say this? Scientists say that Europe may face a dry summer. We are talking about droughts. You might think that the extensive rain will make the soil fertile. So there's no chance of a probable drought. That's not true. Experts say that Europe's long winter drought resulted in dry soil, a kind of soil which cannot absorb rainfall water. So when the ground is very hard, the rainwater will just run off the surface instead of recharging the water reservoirs. This also leads to catastrophic flooding events like the current one. Violent transition between dry and rainy weather has consequences. Will the leaders act before more precious time is lost? Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is on a three-nation tour. On Sunday, he arrived in Papua New Guinea. He received a grand welcome at the airport. He was greeted by his counterpart, James Marape. And that's not all. The Indian Prime Minister was also decorated with the highest honors of Fiji and Papua New Guinea. So what is it all about? What is so special about the Indian Prime Minister's visit there? And how does the Indian diaspora in Papua New Guinea feel about this? How are the relations between the two sides? For starters, this is the first time an Indian premier is visiting Papua New Guinea. And as I told you, he received a grand welcome there. Now, the country does not give a ceremonial welcome to any leader who comes after sunset. But an exception was made for the Indian Prime Minister. He was given a gun salute, a red carpet welcome, was personally welcomed by Marape, who in a surprise move also bent down to touch PM Modi's feet. And it wasn't only the Prime Minister who was happy to see the Indian leader, of course. The Indian diaspora in Papua New Guinea was elated. Around 3,000 Indians live in the Pacific Island nation. Hundreds of them welcomed Prime Minister Modi in the capital city. They were seen waving the tricolour and cheering for the leader. Indian patriotic slogans echoed in the streets of the Pacific Island. Some were seen holding gifts, while others clicked pictures. You see, Prime Minister Modi was there to co-chair the third summit of the Forum for Indo-Pacific Islands Cooperation, or FIPIC. Leaders of all 14 Pacific Island countries attended the summit. During his address, Prime Minister Modi extended Indian support to the island nations. Listen in to what he said.
भारत आपकी प्राथमिकताओं का सम्मान करता है, आपका डेवलपमेंट पार्टनर होने पर गर्व महसूस करता है। मानवीय सहायता हो या फिर आपका विकास, भारत को आप भरोसेमंद पार्टनर के रूप में देख सकते हैं, विश्वास कर सकते हैं।
During his visit, Prime Minister Modi was conferred with Fiji's highest honor, recognizing his role in global leadership. The Prime Minister of Fiji bestowed the Companion of the Order of Fiji on Prime Minister Modi. And Papua New Guinea also followed suit. The Governor-General, Bob Dadae, honored Prime Minister Modi with the Companion of the Order of Loguhu. What for? For uniting the Pacific Island countries and spearheading the cause of the Global South. You see, the gestures mean a lot because very few non-residents of Papua New Guinea and only a handful of non-Fijians have received such honors. And the list includes the likes of Bill Clinton. India and Papua New Guinea have maintained diplomatic ties since 1976. In April 1996, India opened its High Commission in Port Moresby, and since then, both the countries have enjoyed warm and friendly ties. They have been working closely in international forums such as the Commonwealth, Non-Aligned Movement, and the United Nations. From time to time, India provided humanitarian aid and disaster relief to Papua New Guinea as well. From 2017 to 2018, India sent computers and peripherals worth $760,000. And on top of that, it has also been assisting Papua New Guinea in the capacity building efforts. How exactly? By offering training under Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation Program and Colombo Plan. In 2018, when the island was hit by a 7.5 magnitude earthquake, India extended a grant of $1 million. Another assistance was in the form of drugs for HIV patients. A consignment of 7.2 million doses valued at approximately $3 million was handed over to Papua New Guinea in 2016. During his recent visit, the Indian Prime Minister vowed to strengthen relations further. What comes next remains to be seen. Let's now tell you about something that happened in Japan on the sidelines of the G7 meeting in Hiroshima. US President Joe Biden discussed a problem with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. What sort of a problem, you ask? That everyone wants to come for a dinner scheduled in Washington in honor of the Indian Prime Minister. This will be during Prime Minister Narendra Modi's state visit to the US in June. So much so that Biden says he has run out of tickets and that he should take the Indian Prime Minister's autograph because he is too popular.
उसके प्रमुख जो बाइडन, उनके बीच ये मुलाकात
Joe Biden said everyone in the country wants to come to the dinner, from movie stars to relatives, and he playfully complained about the requests for invitations for that dinner. And that is how popular the Indian Prime Minister is. In fact, it wasn't just the American president. According to reports, the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, also said that he was having trouble managing requests for Prime Minister Modi's community reception in Sydney. Also, the American president praised Prime Minister Modi, saying that the Indian leader has been making a significant impact on everything, including what they are doing in the Quad. He heaped praise on Prime Minister Modi, saying that he made a fundamental shift in climate change, that he has influence in the Indo-Pacific, and that he is making a difference. The Indian Prime Minister will be heading to the United States next month for a state visit. The visit is being called a celebration of the partnership between the two sides. Also, speaking of popularity, let's just talk about how popular these leaders are back home. The G7 leaders, how popular are Biden and the other leaders in their home countries? According to survey data compiled by Morning Consult, Prime Minister Modi has the highest approval rating, 78%. And what about the American president, Joe Biden? He stands far behind with an approval rating of 42%. And what about the other G7 leaders? The Australian Prime Minister fares better than Biden. Anthony Albanese has an approval rating of 53%. And then we have the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. She has an approval rating of 49%. Joe Biden, 42%. The Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, with an approval rating of 39%. The German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, 34%. The UK Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has an approval rating of 33%. The Japanese Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida, with an approval rating of 31%. And the French President, Emmanuel Macron, with an approval rating of 25%. Basically, according to Morning Consult, Joe Biden, Justin Trudeau, Olaf Scholz, Rishi Sunak, Fumio Kishida, Emmanuel Macron all have approval ratings of less than 50%. Biden at 42% and Prime Minister Narendra Modi standing at the top with 78%. No wonder the Indian Prime Minister is getting a lot of attention for how popular he is. And before I move on to my next story, I want you to listen to this statement. It is from Sinan Ogan, the third place finisher of the Turkey election.
I declare that we will support the People's Alliance candidate, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, in the second round of the elections. I invite our voters who voted for us in the first round to support Mr. Erdogan in the second round.
Now, this is not about Ogan, it's actually about Erdogan. And I want to begin with this question. Has Erdogan already won? The day the runoff polls were announced, we told you Turkey elections had become a 5% game. The power had landed in Sinan Ogan's hands. The ultra-nationalist leader of ATA Alliance became the unexpected kingmaker. And now he has made his choice. In the Erdogan versus Kılıçdaroğlu race, Ogan has decided to back Erdogan. And much before this announcement, Ogan had dropped ample hints. First off, there was this statement. Listen in.
I think because the opposition is not giving enough confidence to the voters, the opposition cannot reassure people that they can solve Turkey's problems. I'd say the opposition is the one that was most affected by the earthquakes.
Ogan shared his doubts about the opposition. He expressed that Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu had failed to win the confidence of the voters. While Turks were bitter at Erdogan, Ogan claimed that it was the opposition that was the most affected by the earthquakes. And secondly, Ogan aims to eliminate Kurdish parties from Turkey's political equation. He announced that if he were to form an alliance, he would give no concessions to the pro-Kurdish People's Democratic Party. The same party had endorsed Kılıçdaroğlu in the presidential election. The opposition had slim chances to win Ogan's support. Now, as it turns out, Erdogan has really stood the test of time. Despite all the public anger, soaring inflation in the country and allegations of corruption, Erdogan won 49.5% of the votes in the first round. All prediction polls were rendered useless. In fact, he came out to be on top in 10 of the 11 provinces hit by massive February earthquakes. His promise to rebuild the devastated cities actually reassured the voters, mostly in the AKP strongholds. The earthquakes on the 6th of February killed more than 50,000 people in Turkey. Millions were left homeless. The destruction was most prominent across 11 provinces, from Adana near the Mediterranean coast to Diyarbakir in the mainly Kurdish southeast. Earlier, critics and survivors expressed anger over Erdogan government's slow response over its lax enforcement of the building rules. They said that these failures had cost thousands of lives. But soon after the earthquake, people of Turkey were thankful for the government aid. There was little evidence that the issue would change how people voted. Erdogan pledged he would rebuild quake-hit Turkey, and analysts say he delivered at breakneck speed. And now the results lay bare in front of you. Despite the huge death toll, injuries and mass migration afterwards, voter turnout was still very high in the region. Between 85% and 89% of the residents of the devastated areas showed up at the polling booths, and a majority of them cast their votes in Erdogan's favor. His performance was already stronger than expected. And now Sinan Ogan has endorsed him. Well, his 2.8 million voters, will they make the same choice? Has Erdogan won the elections already? On to the UK now. We have talked about the harsh criticism Rishi Sunak is facing, but troubles seem to be mounting for him. The British Prime Minister is now being pressured due to a speeding notice issued to the Home Secretary Suella Braverman. Braverman has been accused of asking civil servants for help just to avoid incurring points on her license. And reports claim Sunak refuses to back Braverman. But Downing Street says he has full confidence in her. Why is the British leader acting this way, and what's really going on? Our next report telling you more.
The leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer.
Show some backbone. This is what the Labour Party has told Rishi Sunak. Why would the opposition say that? Well, the Prime Minister has been accused of being indecisive. Also, biased. This is in regard to a recent case concerning the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. In 2022, Braverman was caught speeding and was issued a notice. This was when she was the Attorney General, the government's most senior legal officer. She was offered the choice of paying the fine and receiving 3 points, or attending a speed awareness course in lieu of points. At this point, she took a controversial step. She asked civil servants if a private course could be arranged. Braverman also turned to her political aides to help arrange an alternative. After the officials rejected her request, she accepted 3 points on her license and paid the fine. But the Labour Party has brought the case into light. The opposition has accused Braverman of breaching the ministerial code, which could lead to an in-depth investigation. Sunak is now expected to consult his ethics advisor, Sir Laurie Magnus. So what does Sunak have to say? Reports say the British Prime Minister has refused to support Braverman. But Downing Street insisted that he had full confidence in her. After coming under intense criticism, Sunak has finally taken the first step by opening a sleaze investigation. This is just part 1 of the story. Suella Braverman is also pressuring Sunak to reduce net migration.
But we need to get overall immigration numbers down. And we mustn't forget how to do things for ourselves. There is no good reason why we can't train up enough truck drivers, butchers, fruit pickers, builders or welders. Brexit enables us to build a high-skilled, high-wage economy that is less dependent on low-skilled foreign labour.
And this isn't working in his favour. The proposed plan has already led to a cabinet split, which spells trouble for Sunak's government. Then there is the cost of living crisis. Rishi Sunak has invited more trouble by saying that the economy is looking up. He says that household incomes are hugely outperforming expectations. The opposition claims the Prime Minister is out of touch with reality. Almost every word that comes out of the Prime Minister's mouth shows how utterly out of touch he is and disconnected from the reality of life for working people in the country. Sunak claims that the consumer confidence is actually increasing. What is also increasing is the growing criticism against Sunak. Case in point, donation from Karan Chanana. He is an Indian rice tycoon and he is under investigation in India for fraud and money laundering. This man is now allegedly pumping money into Sunak's campaign. It is not like the British Prime Minister needed any more bad press. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
There is a tale of blackmail that we would like to tell you about tonight. A story of an alleged extortion. It involves Bill Gates, the American business magnate, and Jeffrey Epstein, a disgraced financier. The story goes back to the year 2010 when Gates met a woman named Mila Antonova, a bridge player by profession. They met for a match where Mila lost the game to Bill Gates. However, their meeting did not restrict to this match. Soon, this converted into a romantic relationship. As per reports, the two were involved while Gates was still married to his then wife, Melinda French Gates. 3 years later, in 2013, Jeffrey Epstein met Antonova. Why? That's because Antonova was looking for financial backers to open a bridge academy, and hence Boris Nikolic, a top advisor to Gates at the time, pointed her to Epstein. And what happened next? Though Antonova did not secure any funding for her academy, Epstein paid for her to attend software coding school. And not just that, Epstein also provided an apartment for Antonova to stay in New York. On inquiring about the purpose behind this generous help, Epstein told Antonova that he was a wealthy man and wanted to help people when he could. Later, in 2017, Epstein, who had learned about the affair, emailed Gates and requested reimbursement for Antonova's schooling course. More than a request, it was an implicit yet subtle threat from Jeffrey Epstein, signaling that he knew about Gates' romantic relationship with Antonova. Now, the question that arises is, why did Epstein try to blackmail Bill Gates? What really was his motive? The truth is, Epstein was attempting to establish a $1 million fund and was unable to convince Gates to participate in it. And as a result of this, he tried to blackmail Bill Gates over his alleged relationship, which by then had been over for years. Epstein wanted money by hook or crook. And 2 years after this email, in 2019, Epstein was charged with sex trafficking. In fact, in 2011, he was already convicted of sex crimes and was registered as a sex offender. And it does not stop here. Epstein was accused in 2006 of sexually abusing young girls and was convicted 2 years later of soliciting and procuring a minor for prostitution. Epstein was found dead in 2019 in a New York jail cell, where he died by suicide while awaiting trial. And earlier this year, Bill Gates had gone on record to say that he regrets having dinners with Epstein. This billionaire blackmail tale was reported by Wall Street Journal, and it further quoted Antonova as saying, "I am disgusted with Epstein and what he did." However, she denied commenting on her alleged affair with Bill Gates. Epstein is known for building business relations with influential people and then using information that could compromise their reputation to fuel his sex trafficking empire. All of this in the guise of being a financier. In fact, there is a documentary which talks about Jeffrey Epstein and is focusing on his life. It's called Jeffrey Epstein, Filthy Rich. It's a 4-part documentary. As for Bill Gates, this is not the first time that his name was linked to an extramarital affair. He is known to have had a string of affairs, and Epstein tried to become rich by encashing on one of them. Jeffrey Epstein was quite famous. He was linked with a lot of famous figures from the West, but for all the wrong reasons. And this time, perhaps, it was Bill Gates' turn. Our next story is about determination. It's about willpower. It's about a modern-day warrior who fought against all odds, stood the test of time, and climbed Mount Everest. Meet Hari Bodha, a veteran Gurkha soldier who has made history by climbing Mount Everest, the very mountain peak which is the tallest in the world. Bodha became the first double above-the-knee amputee to climb Mount Everest. Climbing Mount Everest is, of course, said to be implausible. The mere thought of attempting to climb it takes courage. It takes years of training to climb this mountain peak. And despite that, not many people are able to do it. But here is this man who lost both his legs in a war in Afghanistan, and he made mountaineering history by reaching the summit of Mount Everest. Bodha lost his legs in 2010. This was in a war explosion in Afghanistan, and following this, he slipped into depression and battled alcoholism. In fact, he thought that his life was finished. He even tried to kill himself a couple of times. But then he decided to take control of his life, fight this battle, and make the most out of his life. He thought of the unthinkable. He thought of climbing Mount Everest. However, just when he thought that his amputated legs were the only challenge to his Everest dreams, a government regulation posed to be a bigger challenge. What was this regulation about? It was a regulation that banned blind, double amputee and solo climbers from climbing mountains. And the list of mountains included Mount Everest. This regulation was introduced to reduce the number of climbers dying on the peak. It came into effect from 2017. But what happened next compelled the Supreme Court to change its order. A petition was filed against the ban. It demanded that the ban should be uplifted. It demanded equal rights. The decision was reversed in 2018, paving the way for Bodha to make history. Magar started the climb on the 17th of April, and 13 years since he lost his legs in an explosion in Afghanistan, with only one motive in mind: to change the perception of disability around the world. He battled rough weather. There were sleepless nights, situations where he gasped for oxygen only to be able to motivate people with special needs. His endeavor was to remind the world that with the right mindset, anything is possible, and with strong willpower, one can climb their own mountains. They say these mountains that you are carrying, you were only supposed to climb, and Hari Bodha Magar's story is perhaps a reminder of the same. His story is our #Monday motivation for tonight. With that, it's a wrap, leaving you with Gravitas images as always. Thanks very much for watching.
Sarah Mani, donc la réalisatrice afghane, qui vient nous présenter ce documentaire, ce long métrage sur la conduite. Le coproducteur Fred, qui est donc là en tant que productrice. Sarah Mani.
حلوة قوي.